Hi, thanks, and welcome to Peggy's Place. I'm George Calys, your host today, and we've got kind of a special treat. My guest is Camille Campbell. Camille is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she works with people and she helps them work through issues and problems in their life. Camille, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Hi, George. Yeah, it's great to be here to talk about mental
Fantastic.
health.
Yeah, mental health, emotional health too. I think we'll dive into a little bit. Why don't Camille? Why don't you give us a little bit about your background and what you do for our listeners who may not know you? For those that don't know, Camille lives part-time at the Sea Ranch, and the rest of her time she lives in. I'm sorry, do you live in Oakland? Is that
No,
correct?
I live in San Francisco.
Oh, yeah, she lives in, oh, whoops, sorry, San Francisco, my bad there and everything. And she splits her time. But tell us a little bit about your background and your career and a little bit about your therapy practice.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and I serve clients in California. Before I was in private practice, I worked in community mental health in San Francisco and also in hospital settings in San Francisco. And at that time, I focused on working with older adults. I also had a career prior to being a clinician. I worked in corporate human resources for over a decade, and then I made the transition to what I do now. I do have an undergraduate degree in philosophy and a master's degree in counseling psychology. I am a licensed professional, like you said, in the state of California, and the license is called a marriage and family therapist. And becoming a licensed at the master's level, it's a long process. It involves about 3,000 hours of supervised clinical practice. And you also have to pass two separate state board exams, one on law and ethics, and the other on clinical theory and practice. So that's sort of my background.
That's great. So it's a license that's recognized by the state of California. You hold a license. I'm guessing that probably like a lot of other licensed professions, you have to do a certain amount of continuing education to maintain your license. So do you have to do that every so often?
Absolutely, yes. Every 2 years, you can be audited, and so in preparation for that, you'll go and do sometimes specific things, like maybe like a suicide training CEU class, but other times it's more general, and you can choose things that are related to what you specialize in or what your interests are.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Well, tell us a little bit about your current therapy practice, what you do day in and day out.
Sure, yeah. Well, I am in private practice, like I said, and even though my license is called marriage and family therapist, and that's a fairly large scope, I focus my work in what I call depth psychotherapy for adult individuals. And my practice is pretty diverse. I would say maybe about a third of my clients identify as people of color. The age range of my clientele is 18 to currently 88. And I could say about a third of my clients are over 65. I see people of all gender identities, but I think probably because I am female, I definitely have more clientele that are female identified. And I have clients who are single. I have clients who are partnered or married. I have widowed clients, and I have divorced clients. Socioeconomically, my clientele are pretty diverse. I see clients who are on Medi-Cal, so that means that they're getting some support to be in therapy from Medicaid in the state of California. And then I also have people who are capable of private pay, so they're not even necessarily using insurance to have therapy.
Wow, wonderful. And
Yeah.
how many hours a week do you spend in actual therapy? Excuse me.
I would say that in terms of clinical hours that I'm actually in session, it's about 20 a week. And that includes some supervision that I do for people who are learning to be therapists.
Right. And the rest of your time, you're learning, studying, figuring out who you're going to talk to next.
Well, I'm probably trying to solve a computer problem or
Okay.
books or dealing with some sort of administrative issue that I wish I wasn't dealing with.
So like, I'm assuming like many practitioners in health and in the mental health area, you've had to transition over to online. I don't know if it's called telehealth, but some form of online therapy sessions because the pandemic kept us all apart.
That's so true. Absolutely. It was an incredible transition. Interestingly, I had a sister who was working in an international corporation, and so she was sort of tracking what was going on in China, and I was aware, that something was coming down the line, and so I actually transitioned my older adult clients to telehealth before the lockdown. It was even, announced in California, but it was still a huge and very fast transition from being in person to learning how to be on this new platform and learning how to do therapy, which so much relies on visual cues and audio cues and just what it feels like to be in the room with someone.
Yeah,
so
I would imagine body language has, that has a part of it too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it was a big shift. And I would say that I really disliked it at first. And I was not convinced for like the first 3 months that it was viable. And now I have a completely different attitude. And I think that you can deliver the same quality of care online in most cases than you can in person.
So you see the telehealth and the online therapy is probably something you're going to do, for a while?
Absolutely.
Or will you transition back to in-person therapy or some mixture?
Yeah, I'm going to do a hybrid, definitely.
Okay.
So some people will want to come in person, and that will probably be something that I'll make available when it's safe to be together again. But I'm also probably always going to maintain a certain amount of online availability. Speaking
of the pandemic and the changes it's caused you to take in your psychotherapy practice, let's talk a little bit about how the pandemic has affected people, particularly from your perspective, the clients that you see. What's happening? I think all of us have had periods of being uptight, maybe depressed, anxiety, a lot of issues. What have you been seeing that you would say are the results of the pandemic or affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, I don't think anybody came through it unscathed. I mean, I'd love to meet someone who feels that way, but I haven't yet. So I would say that the impacts are as varied as there are individuals, right? So, I mean, hands down, it was unprecedented, and it caused new stressors. It made existing stressors worse. It forced people into life situations that I don't think people would consider are very sustainable. And there were surprises.
Yeah, give me an example. When you say life situations that weren't sustainable, give me an example of what you mean by that.
Well, just being kind of locked in your house and not necessarily leaving.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, yeah, so let me think of some example. I mean, it was surprising because not everything was always a bad change, but like, so for example, some of my clients who I would say were running really high in anxiety before it happened were almost expressed a sense of validation because finally this unknown catastrophe that they were always fearing finally happened. And they were like, see, I wasn't feeling like this for no reason. So
the prophecy came true.
The prophecy came true. So they were kind of like, kind of like validated. I don't necessarily know that was like ultimately where they needed to get, but that was something that we kind of went through in the beginning. Right. And then there were other people who had like compromised immune systems, and they would miss therapy and work a lot. And then as soon as they were in their bubble at home all the time, they didn't miss work, they never missed therapy, and they were so happy because they weren't being exposed to germs on public transportation and things like that.
I know a few people who, I have a particular acquaintance who made an observation like that, and he enjoys certain hobby activities where there's long periods of time where you work by yourself. In this particular hobby, actually has a couple of hobbies like that. And he commented to me some months ago, he said, no, being isolated from people is perfect. I can work on my hobbies and the things that I want to do, and no one bothers me, and nobody knocks on the door. I can ignore the whole world. He seemed almost happy with it. Yes.
So some of my introverted clients started thriving during the pandemic
Interesting.
because they were excused from it, like what they felt were endless personal and professional social engagements that drained their energy. And they didn't have to come up with reasons why, they didn't want to attend or they didn't have to work as hard to create their time to be with their project, with what gives them energy, which were more introverted activities.
Right.
Now, I'm in the other category. I would say I'm an extrovert, and so I could very much sympathize with clients who were struggling, because of lack of contact with near and dear ones, but also just informal civic and economic contact with even strangers, that that kindness that comes when you order a cup of coffee from someone, or have a nice interaction shopping in a shop. So people need that too, and that was really hard not to have that kind of contact.
Right. And the other thing, well, I think practically everyone noticed this, the physical contact between people. And I don't mean married couples or couples necessarily.
That's a different
topic. We'll come around to that one. But even just, I think many people, I was hesitant to shake somebody's hand when I met them, because we didn't understand the mechanisms by how the virus spread. So we didn't want to touch anyone. We didn't give hugs. Mm-hmm. We didn't give kisses to our closest and dearest friends and everything. And how did talk about that a little? That was another. No,
that's a huge. You're right. That's a huge thing, and actually, that's something that like therapy, physical, like in-person therapy or online therapy. It's not going to provide like the benefits that you get from being able to go out and exercise or get a massage, or even getting like if you're a woman who likes to get a pedicure or something like that, like those types of contacts and physical contact with other humans were not available. And for some people, especially people that were maybe they're more kinesthetic or they're more somatically oriented in their temperament, that was a huge loss. It was very difficult.
Explain that term, somatic, for our listeners. It relates to soma means body. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Explain that term a little bit.
Yeah, somatic, like you said, it just means body. But the way I was using it was just that in some people's temperament is they have a higher level of awareness, body awareness, than other people, and they experience the world more through their senses than maybe other people. And so, that was definitely a huge drawback about that.
Some people give a real firm handshake, and some people give kind of a limp handshake. And, some people are huggers, they hug everybody, and some people are a little cooler about that and everything. So it affected everyone differently in that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I would say along that same line is that, my clients reported more self-medication via drugs and alcohol at home. And that is an understandable, even if not super healthy, response to added stress and anxiety. So definitely people's substance use went up.
That was really common. That has been really common. We're going to come back to that issue because I think it's a really important one. For our listeners and viewers, this is Peggy's Place. I'm George Calys. My guest today is Camille Campbell, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she works with a whole range of clients. And we're talking today about how this pandemic has affected people's mental and emotional states of being. Let's pick apart some of the types of things. I just sort of rattled off a list of things, and tell me, I'm assuming that these things have all been present in some ways, but depression has been an issue that has come up for a lot of people. Depression's always been with us, with certain people, but talk about depression in light of the pandemic.
Yeah, so I would say that, a lot of things, a lot of symptoms, let's just use the word symptoms, like depression, anxiety, insomnia. These are things that are indicative of us being out of balance, if that makes sense. Okay. And so I think it's helpful, to talk about what we mean by being mentally healthy. Start the conversation, because what is that? What does that look like, right?
That's a great question. I think I'm mentally healthy, but I don't know the definition of it, to be honest with you.
Well, the crazy thing is there really isn't a mainstream agreed upon definition of mental health or what it means to be mentally healthy. And I actually went into a dictionary online. I think it was Merriam-Webster or something before we talked today. And I looked up a definition and it said the absence of mental illness. And I'm just like, okay. So that doesn't really give us a roadmap or any like kind of clue about how we might move towards being healthy, right? Or what it might look like when we're healthy. So, you know, through all of the, you know, years of going to school and being supervised and studying, I came across a definition or an acronym by a psychiatrist and researcher named Dan Siegel. And he describes a mentally healthy mind with this acronym FACES. And FACES stands for a flexible, adaptable, coherent, energized, stable mind.
So, say those again. So the acronym is FACES. Yeah. Would you tell our listeners expound a little bit on each one of those? Flexible.
Sure. So the fun thing about FACES is, like, you know, when you're working in therapy, you're looking at, you know, your client's face. So that's kind of cute, right?
Yeah.
But so the first one is was flexible. So like how flexible are we? Are we, you know, when something happens out of the routine, you know, how able are we to adapt? Or that's another one of the things, adaptable. So how can we be flexible in terms of our everyday activities and our way of handling problems? Coherent is sort of like, I think of music, you know, when you hear a chord that's harmonious, you know, like it has diversity in it, but it sounds good together instead of like fighting frequencies that are fighting against each other. So there's like a sense of a resonance or coherence in our mind.
So a person, let's contrast that with the antonym would be incoherent. What would an incoherent? I like the analogy of the music and the chords, because there's chords that are that, like an incoherent chord, we might call that dissonance in music, where it kind of sounds off. It bothers our ears. So what would be an incoherent characteristic in a person?
Well, incoherence might be related to an inability to make sense or to be able to articulate things, or even going as far as maybe psychosis and like things that are just really not in connection to like collective consensus reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think maybe what you're saying, because in everyday language we might say this person's just talking nonsense, or
exactly. There's a non sequitur. There's an inability to like be attuned to like what the conversation is, you know, maybe people are sitting there, they're talking about a specific topic, and then this person just kind of goes off on a tangent because they're
and we all know people like that, or we've done it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what's the E? That's coherence. What was the E?
So again? Energized would mean, you know, we actually, you know, like on a biological and psychological level, have the energy to do what we want to do, to not just meet our basic needs, but, you know, to thrive, you know, to actually set goals in whatever realm they might be. It might be very simple, like just I'm going to hug people today and make people feel better, or it could be I'm going to go gardening, or it could be something really big, like I'm going to solve the climate crisis, you know. But you have energy to do what you want to do.
And the S once again.
So stable. So we need to have a certain amount of stability to be able to handle things and to solve problems and to stay with things that that come to us in our life, because, you know, life is there's a certain amount of suffering in life that we can't escape, right? And so we in dealing with it is part of achieving that stability.
Yeah, because sometimes stability or instability is due to things that are, as you said, are outside of our control. None of us asked for the pandemic. The vast majority of us never even saw it coming. Maybe no one saw it coming. We don't really know for sure. But you know, I certainly didn't see a pandemic coming, but created this instability in some sense that I had no control over, that people didn't have any control over. As opposed, there's other kinds of instability too that are maybe self-induced. Is that possible? Is that correct?
It's possible. Yeah, I mean, it is possible. I mean, I would say that I'd say we can go there in a minute. What I would want to come back to in terms of like the pandemic and what we were just talking about with the FACES acronym is that the opposite of those qualities of health that we described are basically patterns of rigidity or chaos.
Oh, okay.
And so the patterns of rigidity or chaos, we actually have a huge manual that describes all of the variety of them. And it's called the DSM. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Right.
And so
it sits on every physician's and therapist's desk, correct?
Yeah, it's on everyone's desk.
It's your Bible, so to speak.
So to speak, but not really, because I don't want to read it. So it's useful in the medical model, and it's needed for insurance companies. However, it's basically where when you were mentioning before things that we are aware of, like anxiety, depression, these are symptoms and they're classifications of symptoms. And so it's very important. I'm not devaluing it, but I'm saying that it's not the whole picture.
Right.
And so if you take a non-pathologizing approach to mental health, you're really interested in the whole person and not just how their symptoms look. You do care about their symptoms because they can be meaningful. They can be meaningful medically, like it could be just on a very biological level, there's a meaning to the symptom, or they could be psychologically meaningful. Like there might be some meaningful reason why they have a particular symptom.
So I could have a physical sickness that's causing me mental issues.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that can happen.
I guess we've all felt that. I don't know. I think a lot of people, when they have pain, you get out of sorts often if you're in pain.
Absolutely. And sometimes depression can be caused by thyroid problems. So, if people come into my practice and they're out the gate, they really have pretty bad depression, then I'm going to encourage them to go see their medical doctor just to get screened to make sure there's not a physical source of the depressive symptoms. Yeah.
Right. But sometimes it's psychological, you're saying, where there's not, their body isn't sick, but it's something in their mind, their spirit. Absolutely.
And so we, like I was mentioning earlier, like the Buddha was right. Like life is suffering. Like nobody gets out of this life without a certain amount of suffering. But then you were moving on to talk about like possibly self-imposed. So sometimes when we're not able to bear legitimate suffering, we might get symptoms because we're not willing to go through the uncomfortable affect, the grief, the loss, the really, really difficult aspects of being human, right? In terms of avoiding that sometimes can spin off into symptomology.
Right. So you're saying there is something bad happening in the world or in my life, and maybe I just don't want to deal with it or face it, and my mind finds other ways to do it. I think of older adults maybe who've lost a spouse or someone close to them, and they can kind of live in this denial kind of world where they don't even recognize that the person has passed away. Or similar things. Would that be an example of the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good example. And we talk about like psychological defenses or strategies, and they're useful. Like, I mean, obviously, like if somebody was able to avoid using the denial, then maybe they would. But given that perhaps their circumstances are such that they aren't able to handle what's going on with them, they rely on the denial. Then that might cause other problems, right? And so maybe therapy can help. And I think it's important to sort of explain that, we know this, we're all social animals, right? And so I think the reason why therapy is effective is because we if we were harmed or if we were traumatized, it usually had a social or interpersonal context to it.
Okay, that affected us later in life, you're saying.
It could be, yeah, or it
Okay.
could be recent trauma, or it could be
Okay.
like something that happened repeatedly developmentally when we were younger,
Mhm.
like an adverse childhood experience. But these things happened either with like a lack of support from other humans or because of other humans usually. Occasionally it might be like a natural disaster, but
Yeah. Have we
um,
been have we
mhm.
been traumatized by the pandemic, do you think, or have some people?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. People experienced new trauma from the pandemic. I mean, especially people that lost people prematurely.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a really obvious example. But I mean, people that were put in no-win situations, like choices that were just not palatable, one or the other, either in their personal life,
Mhm.
professional life. A lot of people had to make really hard choices, neither option of which were good, and that can feel traumatic. That can be
Right.
in a traumatic way. So I think, yeah, that there is going to be a long recovery period, and I think a lot of people are going to need mental health support, to overcome some of the traumas they experienced in the pandemic.
Right, and that's kind of being recognized by mental health professionals, isn't? I've read some information that a number of mental health professionals think that we're going to have to put additional funding in place for mental health, because we've got millions of people who are impacted by the pandemic and maybe are aware of their mental and emotional responses, and maybe aren't, but a lot of people may. Is that probably true, do you think?
I see it. I mean, I see it not just in my private practice, which is like
Mhm.
we're full at this point because of the pandemic,
Mhm.
but also
Wow.
institutions that I volunteer and work with. They're full up, and we're trying to hire more people to work in the field. So
Wow.
absolutely.
Wow. Hey, let's circle back around. I'm sorry, before we do, I'm going to remind everyone that you're listening to Peggy's Place at KGUA 88.3 FM. And for those of you who are sitting in front of your computer instead of the radio, you can go to kgua.org and listen to us there, or you can listen on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, do a quick search for KGUA, and you'll see Camille and me like you're watching TV. It's kind of fun. Camille, I'm going to circle back to something that we casually mentioned and talk about relationships and the kinds of stresses that the pandemic put on our relationships, both marital relationships or close partnerships, family relationships, parents and children, or the close relationships we have in our life. What have you seen? What's been your observation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unnatural to relate 24/7 to just one person.
Yeah, right,
And
right,
we it's the most stable unit in society probably is the dyad, or the two people, a couple,
right,
right?
right,
Good foundation for us, but our partner or our significant other, they don't they can't fulfill all of the things that we need as a relational being, right?
right,
We
right.
need friends, we need our coworkers, we need just even informal contact with people that we're not close to, that are not our partners. So I think that was difficult for people, and that they were spending a lot of time and they couldn't get all their needs met from.
Right. We were cut off. We used to go into work and we had co-workers, and that was cut off, and we used to see friends and neighbors, and that was all eliminated.
Yeah.
And we were sort of stuck, so to speak, with just this one other person 24 hours a day.
They say, what is it? Absence makes the heart grow stronger. You
Yeah.
need a little bit of longing, and you can't have longing when you're always together.
Yeah, right. Somebody more famous than you or I said, "How can I miss you if you never go away?"
That's a good one.
There you go.
And
Well,
if you
what
that,
kinds of things
yeah.
have you seen with couples, spouses, significant others, What kind of responses have happened in those relationships relating back to the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think that unfortunately there was definitely an increase in domestic violence, and I even saw that in some of my caseload,
Yeah.
and an increase in strife in relationships, and some people parting ways. That's not always the case. You know, other people were able to kind of recommit to what's really important to them, to really kind of like look at their values and think like, you know, given the current circumstances, you know, what can we put our energy into, what we focus on, what can we do? And then we're able to cooperate around that. But you know, people had to come up with solutions. I mean, I even heard one story. This was not one of my clients, but a big roll of like masking tape or like duct tape was just put down the middle of the apartment. And
oh, and you stay on your side and I'll stay on my side?
yeah, so yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but there were other things too, like just making sure that people were taking time for themselves, you know, making sure that you want to walk by yourself, making sure that you do pleasurable activities that you like, even if your partner doesn't like them, you know, and maybe negotiating, like if you have a space issue, negotiating a schedule so that you can do the things that you want to do.
Okay, great. So what do you think? Have most people in relationships, are we as a society successfully negotiating our relationships in light of this pandemic? Or are a lot of us still struggling or maybe in trouble in that way? That's kind of a tough question, I know.
Really the oracle at Delphi, but I
Okay.
only really speak to my own experience. And
Okay.
I think that I think people are in some ways, even at least the people that I've been working with, are even more committed to their own health, and that is helping their relationships.
Oh, okay, good point. Just by them becoming healthier mentally and emotionally, their partner is going to benefit from that also.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. You mentioned insomnia as an issue. Let's dig into that a little bit. I think everyone to some degree has suffered from insomnia one point or another, and some people suffer from it in the extreme.
Yeah.
What's insomnia all about? And I get the pandemic could make this worse. Help me with insomnia as a concept a little bit here.
Well, there's insomnia. Initial insomnia is when you can't fall asleep at the beginning of the night, and then and there's also the kind of insomnia where you might have a midnight wake up, not be able to get back to sleep, and there's a lot. There's a lot about our modern society that I think probably just contributes to insomnia. We didn't used to have electric lights and things like that, where we would, be able to go off of the circadian rhythm, which is the rhythm of light in nature.
Right.
So, the first line of defense, I mean, any doctor or therapist will tell you that the first line of defense for insomnia is behavioral change. So it's about looking at your sleep hygiene, and sleep hygiene relates to the activities you do during the day that are in some way related to sleep. So it could be your caffeine intake, like maybe if you're drinking 6 cups of coffee a day, cut that back. Don't have any caffeine afternoon, like a couple cups in the morning. With respect to the circadian rhythms, are you exposing yourself to light in the morning? That your body is on track with nature. You want your room to be a cooler temperature. You don't want it to be hot in the air. It's okay to have like a heavy blanket on your bed, but you don't want the air hot, and you want your room dark. You don't want to be looking at screens right before bed. And you might.
Why is that? Why do you say that?
Because the light and I'm not a physicist, so I can't tell you exactly the frequency reason. The light simulates the daylight that wakes us up, and so then you'll get off the circadian rhythm, and you won't have enough pressure to sleep because your brain thinks it's daytime.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then another huge one is temperature. So our bodies need to drop down to a certain temperature so that we can go at night, but you might disrupt that by exercising too late in the day or eating too late at night or taking a hot shower or bath too late in the day. So you move those things a little bit earlier in the evening so that your body temperature can come down by the time you go to bed. So those are all sleep hygiene issues.
Yeah, yeah. What about just being worried about stuff and keeping you from falling asleep? I'm sure there's a clinical term for that.
Absolutely. So, they're called negative sleep thoughts.
Oh, okay.
And that's just what some cognitive behavioral folks will call it that. But basically, it's like any kind of repetitive thought or thought that's related to like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to sleep again. Or I'm going to have a horrible night's sleep and tomorrow's going to suck because I'm not going to get, my 8 hours. So the first step to that is just recognizing that you're having them, right?
Okay, awareness of that.
Having an awareness to identify them, and then you can come up with like a believable alternative thought.
Okay.
Be something to the effect of, I know that as long as I get 5 hours of sleep, I can safely operate my car.
Okay. Yeah. So that alleviates some of the pressure.
Yeah. And so that would be one thing if you're dealing with a lot of, intrusive or negative sleep thoughts. But the other thing is even less mental, and it's more behavioral. And it's, you don't want your bed to become a cue for wakefulness. And if you stay tossing and turning for like an hour in your bed, you're going to start, the bed is just going to be a cue to toss and turn. So what I say is that if you've been in bed for 20 minutes and you haven't fallen asleep, you need to get out of your bed.
Okay.
Leave the bed, go in another room. You don't want to do anything with like the computer and the light and all that.
Right.
You do a crossword puzzle on, on a piece of paper, or maybe you do light cleaning, or maybe you do yoga, or, you have some sort of light exercises. You can do that kind of an activity. And then when the body actually feels drowsy, that's when you go back into your bed, because you want your bed to be associated with falling asleep.
Did insomnia increase during this pandemic in your experience or in your study?
No, not necessarily. It wasn't something that, people who struggled with it before
Okay.
continued to, but it wasn't like something that I saw becoming more widespread. But I have a very small sample size, right?
Oh, I understand. Sure, yeah. But in your experience, experience. This is another one that many of us don't know, but we're aware of, and the mental and emotional responses to what I'd call financial insecurity, which was exacerbated, during the pandemic. I don't know how I'm going to make my rent. I haven't gotten enough money for food. I can't buy my kids school supplies. All of those things, which can produce a lot of stress and worry.
Absolutely.
And that's increased, has it not?
Yes, it has. I would say that in those cases, the one anecdote I think for a lot of people is that they weren't so marginalized, in the sense that a lot of other people were also experiencing similar situations. So for example, I had a client that had inability to pay rent and was falling incredibly far behind, but this was like recognized as a social problem, and then were ultimately set aside that allowed back paid rent to be paid. So fortunately, there have been some collective social responses to some of these issues, but certainly there are definitely people that are still, struggling, and it's very hard if their particular circumstance is not being collectively dealt with.
Yeah, right. Let's talk about the process of therapy that you engage in with your clients every single day. I'm imagining that there's probably a good number of our listeners who have utilized a therapist at one point or another, and there's probably also an equally large number of people who, for whatever reason, have not sought the help that a therapist can offer. Fill in for those folks. Fill in what's therapy like? It sounds to me like you just talk to me. Doesn't a therapist just tell me how to straighten out my life? Is that what's going on?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I understand. I would say that like there are a lot of different forms of therapy. So I'm
Okay.
just to the approach that I have.
Right.
And so I would say that most of what my clients have in common is they sort of ran out their existing resources for change. And maybe, you know, they had gone as far as they could with self-help.
Okay.
Trying things, and they were still seeking some sort of personal transformation.
Gotcha.
And they, you know, they I don't know, they wanted to do something that they felt they couldn't do on their own.
Right.
And I tend to focus on life transitions, and some of my clients are seeking to make changes in their careers or in personal domains of their lives. And with my older adult clients, oftentimes they're adjusting to like retirement or to a disability, loss of some kind. And so so I would say that the importance of the therapeutic relationship, or the actual personal or professional and personal connection between the therapist and the client, is actually the mechanism for the change. So it's not so much that I have the answers for them, because I don't necessarily know the answers. In fact, I actually approach it with the assumption that the answer is probably inside of them, right? We get there. And I would say that, you know, there's something about when somebody puts focused, positive regard and attention on us, that helps us like kind of come to life. You know, it helps us sort of, I don't know, feel into things that maybe would be too uncomfortable to feel on our own.
So you're saying it awakens something in the client feels something wakes up inside of him as a result of the dynamic of therapy. Wow. Yeah.
It's not a quick fix. You know, therapy is not a transactional relationship. It's not like you, George, come to me and you're like, okay, I got problem A, B, and C. Okay, Camille, give me my result.
Let's
relationship.
Right. And it requires an investment of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are basic human needs that have to be met before any sort of transformation can happen. So a client needs to feel safe, and they have a certain amount of rapport with their therapist before any like more edgy or personal or private, you know, concerns are going to be disclosed. So it can take a long time for people to feel safe enough to actually really start looking at their problems.
Right. Or even opening up to you and just revealing whatever's on their heart to you. Let's digress just a little bit. As a therapist working with individuals, you have an ethical, maybe a legal duty to treat what you hear in confidence. That's correct, right?
That's true. Yeah.
So that's part of the safety. So when a client tells you something, they can rest assured that it stays with you and it doesn't go anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, there are very few
exceptions
where, and they're mainly related to harm to self, harm to others, and terrorism is one situation. If the client enters their own record into legal proceedings, then sometimes, you know, there has to be a disclosure of client records. But yeah, it's essentially it's the closest secular modern equivalent we have to the confessional.
Yeah, the priest penitent model, exactly. let's talk a little bit in our remaining time about, let's say I want to engage in some therapy, and I want to enter a safe place and work with a therapist. And as you suggested, maybe I have a lot of the answers inside myself, but the therapist helps me find those answers, because you don't actually give me the answers. You help the client search for understand what their issues are and find their answers. But how do I find a therapist? Do I just find someone and say, oh, I don't know, she seems nice, or he seems like an okay guy? There must be more to it than that.
Yeah, so the answer to that, like shortly, is it depends. And I'm
Okay.
feeling you would want to ask this question. So I did a little bit of research.
Okay.
And, I would say, like, first off, if anybody is really in crisis, if they're having like a psychiatric emergency, they should call 911 or go to their
Okay.
emergency room. And there are resources for listeners across any kind of level of socioeconomic status. And so it's just going to be different depending on, what kind of resources you have. So, I mean, maybe I could just start with stuff that's generally available.
Okay.
And because, where we are, we're on the border of 2 counties.
Okay.
And so if we were going to talk about, Sonoma County, they have actually a Warmline, which is a non-crisis line. So it's a line for emotional support.
Okay.
And so they're at 866-960-6264.
And that's for something that's not a giant crisis. I'm not contemplating hurting myself or something. It's at a lower level, but I still would like to talk to someone.
Yes. And then the crisis line, there is also a crisis line in Sonoma County, and it's 707-576-8181. And that is about getting people connected to resources for ongoing treatment.
Okay.
And then there's an organization, a local chapter of the California Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, and they're called Redwood Empire California Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, and they have a website called recamft.org.
Okay. For our listeners who aren't writing all this down, we'll provide this in the text when with the YouTube video, and so these phone numbers and everything will appear. You don't have to memorize them right now. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Camille.
No, absolutely, great. I'm going to send you all of this information, George. So they did something cool with starting with the crisis of the fires in Sonoma County, and then leading on into the pandemic, created a directory of private practice clinicians who will offer a limited number of free therapy sessions. So that is on that website that I listed, the Redwood Empire Camped website. They also have a directory of just private practice therapists in Sonoma County in general.
So if I think I might benefit from a therapy, working with a therapist, I shouldn't really be stopped if I have an inability to pay, or I'm uncertain if I have an ability to pay. What you're saying is there are resources out there that can be tailored to an individual's economic status, his financial ability to pay.
Yes.
So there's no reason not to seek help, is what you're saying.
Oh, there's no reason not to seek help. Like, so for example, like moving on to Mendocino County. Yeah. We have a lot of resources in that first category. They also have a crisis line with the county. It's 1-855-838-0404. And we'll include the county's website for mental health. And that, again, would be accessed regardless of financial ability. We also have 2 great clinics that I'm aware of, and there probably are more, but there's RCMS, and they do behavioral health services, and they offer not just Medi-Cal, which is the Medicaid coverage in California, but they also offer a sliding scale. That's like pay to the ability that you can. And I also talked to somebody there that told me the word on the street is they are going to hire an additional behavioral health clinician. And they would really like someone with trauma, with a trauma background, like experience treating trauma, children, women's issues. So if you're a clinician and you're listening, you should
All right.
check
And
out.
that's RCMS for anyone who doesn't know. That's Redwood Coast Medical Services, located here in Wallowa. And they frequently do send a representative to be on this show, Peggy's Place, from time to time. So that's great. They offer behavioral health services, is what you're saying, and that is irrespective of ability to pay.
Correct. Yeah. And then there's another organization called the Mendocino Coast Clinics.
Okay.
And they also have behavioral health services. They also serve Medi-Cal and populations. And they said that the best way to contact them was to go to their website as well. So I'll include their link when I send things to you, George.
Right.
Broadening out though, because one of the things about it is if you're not dependent upon resources in your county, and if you have out of network insurance benefits, or if you are able to pay out of pocket, one of the really great things about telehealth is that you're no longer limited to working with people in your geographic locale.
Right.
So if you're something that you really are wanting to work with, and maybe you could find a therapist anywhere in California that specializes in that, you could see them online. And that's a new thing. And now if you think that ultimately after we're not staying safe and being staying at home, that you'd want to go in person, then you should think about that too. You should think about maybe selecting someone in your community. So if you're looking for, a private practice clinician, I would ask friends for referrals. I would check out the ICO. I would check out Soundings. I saw an ad in Soundings for Sea Ranch therapy. So there is a therapist operating in Sea Ranch. Your other local papers, look for ads for private practice clinicians. And what I tell, when I tell friends, when they ask me, they say, hey, you're a therapist, like, how do I pick a therapist? I say, talk to at least 3 people. Call and talk to 3 people at minimum before you jump in or before you make an initial appointment. And some people really don't want to talk to someone. And so I'd say, therapists are always in session. So you're going to get their voicemail. So call voicemail and see if you like the sound of their voice. And if you like their voice, then leave a message.
That's a starting point. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
And then just 2 final resources on the bigger picture. So counselingcalifornia.com.
Okay.
These are going to be licensed marriage and family therapists throughout the state of California. So they meet sort of like the professional standard of care just by virtue of being in that directory. And then a very cool thing that came out of the pandemic is the Frontline Workers Counseling Project. So that's fwcp.org. Mm-hmm. So you are a frontline worker, meaning like you've been working in a grocery store, you've been out in the community because of your job during the pandemic, then there are therapists that are willing to offer you through free therapy.
Yeah, because those folks have faced a lot of scary stuff, we'll say. Yeah, that's wonderful. Wow, those are some great resources, Camille. And to our listeners, we'll have those on the KGUA website and social media, so you can get all those phone numbers and websites. It has been great having you, Camille. Just a wealth. I feel like we could go on into this whole thing of mental, emotional health in the wake of the pandemic. It's just a fascinating area, and one I'm sure you and others will continue to deal with and study in the future. It's been wonderful to have you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, George.
Once again, this is Peggy's Place. We're at KGUA 88.3 FM, KGUA.org, or on the YouTube channel. Either way, we're here every day from 9 to 10. This show will replay at 1 p.m., but you can always go to the YouTube and listen to it at your leisure. Once again, I'm George Calys. My guest has been Camille Campbell. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.